Welcome back to Hudson Valley Week in Review. I'm Amy Greene. We continue now with Kingston's Hudson River Maritime Museum's Lighthouses on the Hudson exhibit, celebrating the 100th anniversary of the city's Rondout II Lighthouse. Russell and Ellen Lang share more with us about the history of the structures and why people should make it a priority to visit the museum.
Overall, I think it's really important for people to understand their history. It's important to, and we are all river communities up and down the Hudson, in the Hudson Valley. Each one of the river communities has a unique story. And our museum is about telling those stories, how the river communities have evolved, and particularly the role that the river has played on it. This is a maritime community, Newburgh, Poughkeepsie, Athens. These are all river communities, and the main way you got up and down the river early was on these large ships and boats, and so it's certainly interesting and important to understand that story. Today, shipping is going on, and the lighthouses are still playing that important role. As you know, we have oil being shipped up and down the river constantly in huge barges. Without the lighthouses, we would be a lot less safe than we are today. So, because of the lights and the legacy of that. And people still have questions about navigational safety on the river and how should we be relying on the barges, or should we rely on trains that are going up and down with oil? So there's a lot of things that are very current now about river navigation that's, I think, important for people to know. And it's just interesting to know where it's come from and where we're going. One of the parts of the exhibit is that we put together that connects what these aids to navigation look like today. There's one right over there. They're essentially become lights on poles. They're all automated, run by solar power mostly, and but a lot of the lights have now been rescued by lighthouse groups.
I was just going to say that. The lighthouses have been here a long time, but most of them were boarded up, and this is throughout the country and other places as well, because as Russ said, there are easier ways to have aids to navigation than to support a whole building.
And a family.
And a family, because once they had the ability with electricity to have automatic lights run by batteries, you didn't need a family. So they basically boarded up the lighthouses, certainly along the Hudson River, and I suppose in other places as well, because they didn't want to support a family, in a house, and they really didn't want to have the upkeep of the building. So by the 1980s, because most of these lighthouses were boarded up in the 50s, maybe mid-50s, some somewhat later than that, but they just weren't needed. The Coast Guard could come in and refresh the batteries to keep the lights going, but at a certain point in the 1980s, the Coast Guard said, we don't want to support these buildings anymore, and we're thinking of tearing them down. However, if you community people want to maintain them, we'd be happy to let you refurbish these buildings, because in most cases the lights were not in the buildings anymore. They were outside the buildings, like Esopus Meadows and others, just on a steel post. So the buildings were totally surplus, and every community that had a lighthouse, a group formed and said yes, because people love lighthouses. A lot of people, they make pilgrimages to lighthouses, especially along the ocean. They're famous, and they have sort of different meanings for different people. So, the guiding light thing, and, there's a lot of different meanings that people ascribe to lighthouses. And so the communities along the Hudson basically did come forward and say, yes, we want to save that building even if the light isn't in it anymore. And they did. In some cases, like our building here at Kingston, it was in pretty good shape. It's a brick building, and it really hadn't deteriorated too badly. But some of the others had. Some of the others, like Saugerties, was in bad shape, and Esopus Meadows is a wooden building, so that was starting to pretty much, not be too great. But every community that had a lighthouse that they wanted to restore did actually restore the buildings. And the great part, the cool part, as far as most of us are concerned, is in most cases they restored the lights to the buildings where the light had been removed and just put up on a pole outside, like Esopus Meadows, they actually restored the light to the light tower, which was like unbelievable. The Coast Guard was willing to do that. And so that makes it like almost, you know, it's miraculous and very special to all the communities that did that, and they feel even more probably connected to it. Plus, they're terrific tourist attractions, these lighthouses. People come from all over to see an actual lighthouse which has been restored. Saugerties is a bed and breakfast. And there's interest in that in other communities as well, including there was some interest here in Kingston to do that. And in other areas, they do that. They have bed and breakfasts, and so the lighthouses really earn their keep. Whether in some areas the lights are on a pole or not, if the building's there and they can use it for another purpose, great, because then it's a real win-win situation. You know, even if the light isn't in the building anymore, the building is still there and people love it. And we're lucky enough here, our lighthouse still has a light in the original tower, and several others have returned. So it's a great story. It's, you know, like recovery from sort of almost non-existence for some of the buildings. And some buildings were torn down, Stuyvesant and Coxsackie. They were torn down because they were in areas where it seemed like there was a lot of ice damage many, many winters. So those buildings were torn down a long time ago. And there's just a light on a pole and a foundation. But at least we have some of them. And again, they're just extremely popular. When we were lucky enough to have a boat available, we did a lot of tours, and people loved it, taking people out to the lighthouse. But we can't offer it too often because the boats are quite expensive to own and to operate. But we do occasionally do with boats from other areas. We are able to do tours. This summer, for example, we'll be doing several tours between here and the Esopus Meadows Lighthouse, because they're only about 3 miles apart with one boat. But people wish we could do it like every week. But, you know, we all have websites, Hudson River Maritime Museum, and there's Hudson River Lighthouse websites, too, that people can check out. Hudson Athens Lighthouse, Saugerties Lighthouse, Esopus Meadows Lighthouse, you know, for further information about the lights and what activities they might have at their particular sites. Because they are all pretty active, as much active as they can be, and as long as they have a boat to get out there.
You know, there's something really just wonderful about the idea of a light guiding you safely home to port.
Yeah, especially on the ocean. I think those lighthouses especially, you know, it's really, I think that's what attracts a lot of people to the ocean ones, because they're so huge and they're helping the sailors out at sea. The Hudson River doesn't quite have that mystique, but it served exactly the same purpose, exactly, to prevent ships. In many ways it's
more treacherous because of
the shallows and the rocky points and so on. Yes. I mean, it's the same purpose. It's just, you know, not ocean, but still important, very important.
And we have beautiful lighthouses up and down the river.
Well,
so
they're nice to see.
They're worth celebrating.
They're all slightly different, the ones that remain, and it makes it kind of fun. And we do have a lot of people that just want to photograph them too. And so we always, you know, think and to tell our volunteers, well, if they want to know where they can see the lighthouse, send them out to Kingston Point Park, you know, and how to see the Esopus Meadows Lighthouse, because it's sort of like birders. They have lists and they want to see them. And a lot of them, places that are close to the lighthouses or lighthouses themselves, have stamps that stamp people's lighthouse, whatever, books, passports. So it's extremely popular, and it's nice. We are happy to see visitors, of course. That's what we're here for, to share the history.
When we come back, a look at some of the headlines making news in the county. Stay with us.